All right, everybody. My first guest up this week on the show is Chris Lee over at the Southeastern 16, also vandysports.com. We're going to have a lot to talk about there, Vanderbilt as well. But Chris, I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, I always enjoy joining you. And no, I didn't think Vanderbilt would be a topic on this week's show either. But it was a crazy weekend.
Yeah, it was. I was glad to have it back. It felt different with the
Yeah.
SEC on ABC part, no CBS, but Texas and Oklahoma being part of the conference as well. But you look back at week one in the SEC. Any what are some things that really just stood out to you?
Well, we'll get to Vandy. I'm sure that was a big stand. I mean, probably the biggest surprise of the week was Vanderbilt winning that game, and it wasn't a surprise. But I thought Georgia was a big story when you looked at a lot of the predictive models. And this is an era when, keep in mind, last year the playoff, you had four teams get in with 2 weeks left in the polls. Ohio State's number one. Ohio State wasn't one of them. Georgia next week going to the championship games. Number one team in the playoff rankings. Didn't make it either. So that's the world we live in where margins are that thin. A lot of the computers that I look at had Georgia 3 to 5 points better than any other team in the country, and that's hard to do. And I just thought, okay, let's see if this holds up. I mean, some word out of Georgia, this might be their best team yet. And look, they're going to play some tougher teams than Clemson in the league. And we all know about Clemson and Dabo Swinney in the transfer portal, but I don't care. Beating them, what was it, 34-3 or 31? I think it was 34-3, whatever the score is. Don't have it in front of me. Beating them like that decisively, because they can put a defense on the field, I thought was a big story, and just kind of announcing maybe Georgia is what everybody thought it was. And I think just the big picture storyline of just the league's dominance, you could argue right now, and the computers do, that teams 2 and 3 in some order are Alabama and Texas. That's nationally, that's not in the SEC. I think Ole Miss is still being underrated a little bit. And you got some other teams out there like Tennessee, that may be a playoff contender. I think Ole Miss certainly a playoff contender. I would put Ole Miss in the playoff. I wouldn't bury LSU just yet. I mean, you've got 7, 8 teams Missouri, of course. I knew I was forgetting somebody that could legitimately be in the playoff. And I think that just speaks to the dominance of the league right now.
Yeah, it's going to be so interesting when we do get into conference play, when these teams are playing against each other each and every
Yeah.
week. Like, I feel like it's going to be hard. I really feel like it's going to be hard for anybody to come out of this. Like, maybe Ole Miss because of their schedule, but outside
Yeah.
of maybe that kind of situation, like just come out of it unscathed when we get to the end of the season for the SEC championship game.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking up right now at the schedule, because really when it starts is week 4. You got one SEC game this week. You still got some teams playing some garbage games in week 3. But then, like, I'm looking just at my helmet schedule. First SEC game in no particular order, you got Arkansas at Auburn. Okay, well, Auburn vibes were good coming out of that one. You put up 76, what was it, or
73 to
73?
3.
Yeah, in 50 minutes of action.
Mm-hmm.
So they can get a full game in. Arkansas, scores 10 times in 10 possessions. Pine Bluff may be the worst team in the FCS. So let's put it in context. But you've got Bobby Petrino, who had some success there before. Taylor Green looked good. Jaquindon Jackson, their tailback, looked good. If Florida at Mississippi State is an intriguing game for different reasons. I mean, you start to look down the schedule. Other games that week. Missouri Vandy, I don't know that it will be interesting, but more interesting than it would have been a couple weeks ago. Oklahoma, Tennessee, that's the game I circled is probably a top 5 game I don't want to watch all year. That's what we're about to get into. You match up a lot of these teams. Now, I don't know that Texas, Mississippi State will be that interesting, although that's the next week. But my point is, based on what we've seen and some of how these teams like Auburn and Vandy we had questions about, and maybe the only disappointment really is A&M so far, but Notre Dame's a good team. I just think the intrigue of the week-to-week matchup against, just pit whatever 2 teams you want is going to be fascinating. It's going to be more of kind of an NFL-like parity, it feels like to me.
So talking about Vanderbilt, the game was on my radar. I said, okay, that's on at 11 my time against Virginia Tech. I know a lot of people I've seen out there, and I've talked to a few people doing podcasts and stuff. They were high on Virginia Tech. They thought that might be a sleeper ACC team. And then Vanderbilt beats them overtime 34-27, jumps out 17-0. Just what stood out to you with Vanderbilt's performance? Obviously Diego Pavia was awesome. Auburn fans know all about him. I think the rest
Yeah.
of the SEC is about to find out about him too. Just, Vanderbilt getting that big win on Saturday.
What stuck out to me is that Clark Lee had a plan and he stuck with it. And after 1 week, you give him an A for what he's done. Because look, they got beat by UNLV last year in September, and that was the game they blew a big lead. To that point, the plan was we're going to go get and develop high school kids and keep them, and by the time they're fourth and fifth years, we'll be rolling out some experience. Well, that's what Clark started under when he got the job in 2020. Now, what happened right after that? NIL and the portal combined, and just, everything broke loose, and that was no longer a sustainable plan. They were late to adapt to that. And last year when UNLV beat them, and ULV had a mobile quarterback named Jaden Maeva, who now is the backup at Southern Cal, they said, hey, let's look at the last time we won a game against a Power 5 team, because last year they lost all 9 of their Power 5 games, and they lost them all by at least 16 points. And they said, we had Mike Wright back at the end of 2022 when we beat Florida and we beat Kentucky. And one reason we beat him is because Mike Wright was a 10-600-meter guy. And when it's 3rd and 8 and all your receivers are covered, he can still get a first down. So they thought about that. They're like, we need a mobile quarterback. And then they started looking at film, and they saw what New Mexico State did to Auburn. I think they were already looking at them anyway, but Clark Lee just said, hey, I want those guys to come run our offense. And so next thing you know, they get Jerry Kill as an analyst who was their head coach, Tim Beck, who's their offensive coordinator. They bring in their quarterback. And I saw it in camp. And Phillip, I'm here to tell you, it was not pretty. I was not thinking when I walked in that stadium Saturday, they're about to go out and really, for a half, beat the brakes off Virginia Tech and then hang on at the end. But that's what fall camp is for. It's to get guys reps. It's to get your system in. Pavia didn't get to campus till summer. And maybe it just took a while to gel, but they had a plan that they executed. They were stronger on the lines of scrimmage. They changed strength and conditioning coaches. They outsacked Virginia Tech 4-2. You don't usually see Vanderbilt's defensive line outperform another Power 5 defensive line. I just thought there were a lot of stamps of validation. And by the way, they're fun to watch. Diego Pavia, he's not Johnny Manziel, because Manziel was more talented, but he kind of plays that style. If you didn't see him, it's like watching a point guard run a football game. It's just different than anything you're going to see. And I think that's what they were counting on. They're really hard to prepare for. And even if you're preparing for them, he's running the ball 1 minute, and a half second later, he's flipped his hips and thrown a swing pass. And that's just really hard to stop.
Yeah, he did that once with Cedric Alexander on the touchdown.
Yeah.
It looked, he sucked the defense in. Like, they thought, okay, he's about to try to run it in himself. Next thing you know, swing pass, Alexander gets in for the touchdown. And with this win beating Virginia Tech too, I think it was impressive too, because you go up 17-0 in a team, and I kind of relate sometimes because I cover high school football down here too as well.
Yeah.
When you're not used to winning, it's hard to build that confidence, making a team believe they can win a football game. And the fact is, Virginia Tech comes back, ties it, takes the lead. Vanderbilt didn't waver, and they came out with a win. I kind of feel like, and of course you're a lot more closer to than I am, obviously, that in the past, maybe they wouldn't have been able to bounce back like that after blowing a lead, but they were able to bounce back and come away with the victory.
Well, and let's dissect how that happened too for a minute, Phillip. First of all, you're playing a veteran team. Tech returned more starters than anybody in the country. So you would think that would be a place where a veteran team would really shine. Vanderbilt led 17-0 in the first half. And with 4 minutes and 12 seconds, they are down 7 points for the first time all day, because a cornerback took a chance on a route where he thought he saw a chance to make a play. And what happened instead was you had people in the front row of the stands that were closer to their receiver when he caught the ball than their defensive backfield was. So not only did you give them the go-ahead touchdown, you gave them one in the worst way imaginable. And if you're Vanderbilt, you're playing in stands, the other team's fans have got you outnumbered. Everything is against you. And I think that's where Pavia was so important. He brings them down the field. He gets the game-winning touchdown with under 2 minutes left. And they get the ball back, Phillip, and they miss a field goal. They got a first-time kicker who's hit 2 pretty good kicks, but he misses one under pressure. You're like, oh, boy, here you go again. They had their chance. They blew it. And then Tech gets the ball last in overtime. You always want to be that last guy. So that break went against them. but they got the touchdown with Pavia. They held in overtime. I just think it was more than just the history. A lot of stuff went against them in the last 5 minutes, and they responded every time.
So with this win, how much does it change your expectations for the season for Vanderbilt?
I think bowl game can be on the table now. I think it's still an uphill climb, and I would probably bet against unless they're one of those 5-7 teams that gets in. But you always said the path for them had to start by winning against Virginia Tech, because if it doesn't, you don't know the way. Now it's like, okay, they should beat Alcorn State handily this week. They should get Georgia State next week, although that game is in Atlanta, so it's a little more difficult. And you look down the schedule, Ball State's a game where they'll be a double-digit favorite. In between, you got to pick off somebody. The most likely candidates to me seem to be probably Kentucky. They won last time they were, or maybe Auburn. No offense meant to your audience, but we know what happened last time Jerry Kill played Auburn. So there's a little history of being able to figure some things out. South Carolina's won. That's probably the most winnable game in the conference on paper, though Carolina's dominated that series. I don't know where they're going to come from. Are they going to get all those games? No, I would almost say with certainty they're not. But they're not ridiculous thoughts anymore like they would have been, say, a week ago.
Look, I'll even go further back to you on the Jerry Kill Auburn part. That's a Hugh Freeze deal, because he lost to him in his last year at Liberty too.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So he lost to him at Liberty too, New Mexico State. So I believe, it's almost, I feel like on the Auburn side of that game, they could almost look at it like, okay, this is a revenge game from last year. We're looking at that quarterback, which, but it's kind of familiarity on both sides.
Yeah.
Looking around the rest of the big games from this past week, Georgia, you mentioned a little bit, Georgia beating Clemson going into that one. I didn't feel like Clemson had a shot. I know that's kind of hot takey. I thought maybe going into the game that just Clemson, I don't like the receivers. I just didn't think they'd have the offense. But it never felt like Clemson was really in the game, a lot of it, even though when Georgia was up 6-0. Chris, it really felt like to me like Georgia feels like some of them early Nick Saban teams, where Alabama, where they're not going to beat you 55 or 60-0, but they're just going to keep running, keep pounding you. And then you look up at the scoreboard and it's 34-3. But it just never felt like, because Clemson just could not do anything offensively like they really ever were in it. When it was 13-0 to start the second half, it felt like 30-0 to me. How about you?
Yeah, I think the Nick Saban early Alabama teams is a good one. And look, I didn't think Clemson was going to win that game either, but there were a couple things that maybe cracked the door a little bit. You had the ETN suspension. You had them kicking Ra Thomas off the team. You had some other guys that were kind of questionable. I mean, their running back room was already a little bit thin with some other injuries. I mean, you didn't think it was going to, you kind of figure, okay, Kirby Smart's won 40 straight regular season games or whatever it is now. And they've always handled Clemson, even if it's been close. So I didn't really think it was going to happen, but it felt like the door had maybe been cracked a little bit more than you would have thought a couple of weeks ago, but it just didn't matter in the end. And that's what they are at this point.
Yeah, and of course they're going to play tougher teams moving forward.
Yeah.
I mean, and all of those games are on the road at Alabama, at Ole Miss, at Texas. So, so for Georgia, we're going to find out how good they are. Like you mentioned, and Trevor Etienne not being there. I mean, that's a weapon not only as a guy that could run the ball, but also out of the backfield. But Nate Frazier was good there, came in at running back. He plays really well, and it's just, I don't know, that defense is just. I don't feel like they had the superstars maybe they had a couple of years ago when Kirby won that first national championship.
Yeah.
But it's just the depth of that defense, just the different waves of guys they could throw at you.
Yeah, and that's what every year you look in the box score, and I'm always trying to figure out, like, who is it that's like when Jordan Davis dominated, everybody talked about him, Heisman dark horse. We only played like 300 something snaps.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think you can give a Heisman to a guy that plays 300 something snaps, and they have so many pieces. Like their tackle sheet is that long, and everybody and their brothers got multiple quarterback pressures. Like it's hard to tell, like, who's driving that and who's kind of along for the ride. And then you look at the NFL draft every year and it feels like they're all driving it, but it's just an interesting dynamic because, and that, I think that's why they're so good year in and year out, Phillip, is they just get ahead of teams. Everybody gets reps. And so, yeah, you might lose 8 starters in the NFL on defense, but your 8 backups that step up or guys that played a lot of ball because you're doing to teams what you're doing and you're getting a lot of time.
Yeah, it's like you lose starters, but you don't lose experience. They still got guys that have
Right.
been out there on the
That's
field
a
play.
great way to put it. Yeah. Yeah.
So the next thing I wanted to ask you about, why isn't it working with Billy Napier at Florida?
Man, I don't know. I guess some guys are just meant to be head coaches and other guys are not. I mean, let's be fair too. That program has struggled when it's not had an elite coach over the last 20 years.
Mhm.
Spurrier stepped down and Ron Zook struggled. Urban Meyer took over. They got back and winning national titles again. Were as good a program as there was in the country. He leaves, under Will Muschamp, they're just kind of so-so. They just kind of, I don't know. It just never really, it seems like if they got a Hall of Fame coach, they're getting it done. And when they don't, they're not. And that's probably oversimplifying it. I mean, a lot of stuff has changed. You had the NIL situation, you had the Jaden Rashada thing that got her off to a rough start. Still, like you go back 2 years ago, it felt like they were getting there at the end of the year.
Mhm.
Until Vanderbilt beat them and they weren't. It's just kind of been in a downward spiral ever since. And when you're in the SEC and you get in a downward spiral, it is hard to get out of it. And I think their schedule, I thought they really had to beat Miami. Their schedule is the toughest schedule I have ever seen. And so I think
Yeah.
everybody's already kind of buried him. Like if you're playing Ole Miss's schedule, I'll just look at it, eyeball it, and tell you how many games I think they could win if they don't throw in the towel. They could have beaten Furman last week. They would beat MTSU. They'd have a shot at Wake Forest. They beat Georgia Southern. They'd have a shot against Kentucky. That's their first 5 games, and then out South Carolina. You could argue that Florida, if they're feeling okay, could go 6-0 on that
Mhm.
schedule. Instead, they got Miami. We know what happened there. They got Sanford this week. They should get that one, although we know what happened last time those teams played. Then you got A&M. You got a road trip to Mississippi State that's maybe a little bit tougher. And then you get a week off, and then you got a UCF team that's probably better than we thought. I mean,
Yeah.
you start looking ahead, and you can't find a path out of it. And it, by the way, it gets worse in the second half. And I think that's part of the problem, too. There doesn't seem to be a realistic path for Billy Napier to get out of this and have everybody feeling good. And that's not all his fault.
Yeah, you talking about that UCF? I mean, you got a UCF team coming in with Gus Malzahn. Oh yeah, and he's got KJ Jefferson as his
Yeah.
quarterback now. So I mean, someone that really fits what he does. So, and just watching the game, I thought going in, I picked Florida to win. I thought Miami and Florida were closer to the same. I thought they were about two similar teams, two coaches that definitely needed a win. But Cam Ward was awesome. Awesome. They didn't really get any pressure on them, and it just seemed like the same thing as last year. They don't really have much down the field in the passing game. Part of it could be protection for Graham Mertz, and 2, receivers just not getting up and down the field. Last year, just if it was Ricky Pearsall and nobody else was really getting open. I mean, they ran the ball. They had over 100 yards from Marshall Johnson, but most of that came from 71 yards. So it seemed like offensively, they got some issues there too.
Well, they did have a Eugene Wilson who put up some big numbers, but it's easier for Wilson when you got a first-round pick on the other side. And I think they've got a tight end named Arliss Boardingham that I kind of like, who's shown up in spots. But you do wonder if losing Pearsall, that changes the dynamic of the room when you lose a first. I mean, heck, LSU saw that the other night when they lost 2 first-rounders and they lose to Southern Cal. But, yeah, I mean, that's – look, it's not the – here's the thing. And I'm the guy, speaking as a guy that talked myself into Florida being a good team with a bad schedule. They're always in the back of your head is, hey, wait a minute. It's not going as well as you'd think it would. Am I missing something? And I thought, well, wait, you got a coach on the other sideline. You saw how he lost the Duke game last year. So you're thinking, they might be in one of those games that's close and you're in the swamp and that's in your favor. You're playing a team you hate and you got a coach that doesn't always know how to finish out games, but they just got overwhelmed by the talent. I think that's a problem.
Yeah, it is. I wonder too if it really starts going south at some point. You just say, "Hey, you sit Graham Mertz and you just see what you got with DJ Lagway rest of the way."
I got asked about that this morning. Like, do they do that? And I had to think about it. I just thought, that the common sense answer is, when it's going poorly, you need to give people a reason to hope. And nobody likes something better than the second team quarterback when it's going wrong. He's always the most popular guy on the team among the fan base. And throw in the fact that he's a 5-star recruit. Now he's really popular. I don't know. But with Mertz having an injury, that sure does seem to open the door there.
Trust me, covering Auburn as I do, everybody wants somebody other than Peyton Thorne being the quarterback.
Yeah.
Even after this past week, especially going into the season. LSU on Sunday night, of course, we saw Brian Kelly pounding his we hear that phrase, pounding your hand on the table. He literally pounded his hand on the table after the game Sunday night. I really felt like LSU outplayed them most of the game. Like they should have won that game. And he's kind of right. They do have those issues in the games where they just can't figure out how to win them. He's lost overall as a coach like 5 straight
openers.
Openers. I know LSU hasn't won one since 2019. How do you fit LSU in it with the rest of the conference?
If they don't get a stupid penalty or too late, maybe we're having a different conversation. I did feel like they weren't finding as much room to throw to. I feel like they've got a good quarterback. USC's defense had gotten better. They changed coordinators too. But I think, some teams like Alabama and Georgia, they can just lose guys and they just restock at that level. I'm not sure LSU's right back there yet. I feel like you saw, and of course they lost a quarterback for the ages in Jaden Daniels too. They got better on defense. They got some stops at times. They got better play out of their defensive backfield at times. But it's kind of no wonder he wanted to slam his hand into the table because some of the penalties at the end were just senseless. He probably wanted to slam his hand into a player or two if you're being honest about it. But yeah, I mean, for whatever, that's one of those games could have gone either way. They didn't make the plays. They have themselves to blame, but I'm not burying them yet. They've still got a lot of parts there. I just don't know. I'm not sure that they're national title contenders.
So I'll let everybody know we recorded this at 12:40 Central Time on a Wednesday. I just got popped up on my phone here. Never out John Emery rest of the year, ACL injury.
Oh no. Well, and see, that was another thing. I'm glad you mentioned that. John Emery's been there forever and when he got there, he's supposed to be the next big thing. It had never worked out for him. Some of that was tough luck. Some of that was probably his lack of maturity. But he ran hard in that game. I thought was a bright spot. You hate to see that happen. That's terrible.
Yeah. So not breaking news here as we conversate. Looking ahead to week 2, we have some interesting. Of course, the Texas at Michigan matchup is the headliner. What are some things when you look ahead to the schedule for this week that you're really looking forward that you'd like to see?
Well, let's start with that one. I don't think Michigan can move the ball enough against Texas to win. I don't know if they shift quarterbacks and go to Orgy. There's probably more upside there. That the starter's a walk-on. It didn't look great in the passing game a week ago. So there's that. I really wonder if Texas can run the ball against Michigan. That front four is awesome. I mean, the whole defense is, if you believe the preseason hype. So I kind of want to see. They lost C.J. Baxter. Where's the running game go? I'm looking to the right to my schedule to make sure I don't miss anything. I think Arkansas, Oklahoma State's a big one because let's say Arkansas goes and get this one. You're looking at Sam Pittman a lot differently. It's not who are we going to fire at this point. I don't know what to make of them just, beating the tar out of Pine Bluff. But, you can't do better than scoring touchdowns on every possession. I like the way the offense looked. I thought Taylor Green was great. I like Jaquindon Johnson. I may have mentioned him earlier. I can't remember. Apologies if I did. I think that's a game that you're circling all of a sudden that you weren't before. I'm going to pass over Auburn Cal because I'm just going to presume that Auburn takes care of business. If it doesn't, we're having a different conversation. Kentucky, South Carolina, boy, it's hard to see a path for South Carolina to win as bad as they looked last week. Mm-hmm. But is this the quintessential you get better from week 1 to week 2 situation? You've got a quarterback who didn't throw the ball very well last week. Nick Harbor didn't get a reception. I don't know what was going on there against a Kentucky team that I think was a little bit underrated. So I got my eye on that one. And let's see what else we got. Mississippi State, Arizona State's intriguing. Arizona State's about a 6.5-point favorite. I don't know what we learned from Mississippi State last week, other than I thought they looked as good as they could. I'm interested to see specifically on defense if they can get some stops. I think Arizona State scored in the 40s last week. And looking down the schedule, trying to see if we miss anything. I don't see any other games of serious interest. I mean, you got some that you could squint and say maybe, maybe if Oklahoma is still struggling on offense like he did in the second half, that might be strong. But I don't think Houston's good enough to give them a game. But it's not a great week of games.
No, it's not. You got some highlights, but it's kind of like you got some highlights, but then also you got some. Okay, probably gonna see a lot what we saw in week one. So it'll be interesting. I agree with you, Texas, Michigan. I don't think Michigan's got the offense to hang in this one. It's just
you got to be able to throw the ball to win in this day and age, and I'm just not sure they can.
Yeah, they're them and the forward pass may not be best friends.
Right.
This upcoming season. But it's gonna be a fun week, and this is fun having you on, Chris. As always, enjoy y'all guys' content over at the Southeastern 16. As always, if the listeners, viewers want to check you out online, where can they find you?
Yeah, what I tell people, if you're looking for local coverage, your favorite team, Auburn, Alabama, whoever, you're going to find people that nail your team better than we do. If you're looking to see intelligent discussion of all 16 of them and how they stack up, football, baseball, basketball, that's what we're here to do. I think we do a pretty good job of it. And we do it year round. We're literally doing a baseball podcast once a week in the off season. So if you like you year round in those three major men's sports, go to YouTube, check us out at Southeastern 16.
All right, everybody go do it. And Chris, again, appreciate the time, and I look forward when we get to do this again sometime down the road.
Hey, always fun. Always appreciate you having me on, and God bless you.